Hi, people. I want to say a few words on this latest tragedy on the English Channel. So, just over a year ago, there was that major incident with 27 people perished. I think it was November 2021. And there's been another tragedy. Four people have died. Um, it seems that there was a fishing boat that picked up survivors. But last year's incident was closer to the French side. Apparently, this incident was much closer to the Kent coast. But there were multiple parties involved: the Royal Navy, the French Navy, the RNLI, and the fishing boat concerned. Huge credit to them for doing the right thing. There is one school of thought that goes so far as to say, for example, that the RNLI shouldn't even try to help. Um, I totally disagree with that. I think that the fundamental job of the RNLI, for international viewers, that's our lifeboat service, is to save lives. It's not up to them to set a sort of political precedent of what should and shouldn't be done. Their fundamental job is to save lives. Um, Now, as for the political debate, Sunak's government has set out a series of measures in the Daily Mail about what they're going to do to address this problem. One of those is going to reallocate this situation where people are sent to hotels and instead send them to disused student accommodation. And I believe not Butlins, one of the Pontins, I think it's called, one of the other theme parks, for want of a better term. They're not technically theme parks, but anyway, reallocating them from hotels, which is costing too much money, and which people might rightly ask, well, we have rough sleepers in Britain, they're not being put into luxury hotels, decent hotels. Um, but my overall take on this is sort of middle ground, because I think there's two fundamental problems here. One is the humanitarian side of it. People are risking their lives in freezing waters, and you'd have to be a pretty cold individual not to have some human compassion for that, regardless of why they're coming over. That's something that there's clearly a that's clearly a desperate move to come over in that way, whether it's from fleeing persecution or if they are indeed economic migrants. There's been a big focus recently on Albanian nationals coming over. I do think that warrants questions. Albania is it's not a wealthy country, but nor is it a war zone. Um, so there has to be scrutiny of why there is such a disproportionate influx of Albanians recently. And from what I've seen, the Albanian ambassador didn't. I don't think he had a very good attitude. It was pretty much trying to use the racism card against the British side without really taking any responsibility. That's just poor leadership. These people are nationals from his country. The onus is at least partly on Tirana to take some responsibility for that. One proposal is that the Albanian government contributes financially to that. There may be some merit in that, because it is disproportionate. I mean, we're not talking about Syrians or Ukrainians, Albanians. It's not a war zone. Um, and like I say, it's a country that has poverty. It's not a Western country, but it isn't comparable to some of the other parts of the world where you have a war zone like Ukraine, or you have severe human rights abuses like Eritrea. Um, it's neither of those situations. So yeah, there are questions about that, and I think the Albanians have to be a little bit more responsible instead of just trying to say the British are being racist. Um, so the government's focus is on deterrence, trying to stop people coming over in the first place, whereas refugee charities are saying the focus should be on compassion. I have to say, I think they're being incredibly short-sighted. Of course, compassion should be involved, but my question for those refugee groups, those refugee charities would be, okay, so the government takes this policy of we'll just let anybody in, because they're, using these dire conditions to get over. So we'll just say we'll just accept anybody. Well, the problem with that is, firstly, it gives a green light, I would imagine, to people smugglers, because then they see a business. So the charities may be thinking that this is the compassionate approach to people who are being smuggled. But how is that a deterrent for the people smugglers? If there's no barrier to people coming over, then if it's just literally an open door, then you're going to have a situation where um, people traffickers are constantly exploiting other human beings. So ironically, for all their talk of compassion, is it actually compassionate to essentially enable people traffickers? They say the government's hardline approach isn't working. There may be something in that. Clearly, the tough talk from the Home Office isn't deterring people; it isn't putting people off. And as always, this gets into Anglo-French relations. How much culpability the French have. They might say, "Well, this is on our side, so it's our culpability." Um, but this is something that is only going to get worse, and there's now a situation where people in Kent are actually arming themselves because of fear of crime, of the influx of people coming over. I think language is important. Apparently, Suella Braverman spoke of an invasion. Now, that's a bit alarmist and, in my view, irresponsible. But there has to be some sort of balanced approach. Um, this country has a long tradition, as the Prime Minister said, of welcoming people, of providing refuge. But we can't simply have a situation where we let anybody in. And I sway towards agreeing with the government. If you have this situation where it's there's no barriers at all, then people traffickers are going to continue exploiting people. Now, the charities say the answer is to make the application process easier, but where do you draw some line? Because there will be people who exploit that. Not everybody who is coming over is fleeing war or persecution. Um, And I think there probably are loopholes in the system that are making it, people will use that as a sort of go-to, when really they're just here for financial reasons. Britain's a small country. Geographically, we're not a very big country, 245,000 square kilometers, roughly speaking. Yet we have 68 million people. So we're actually quite a densely populated country. Why does that matter? Resources. We're a wealthy country, but there has to be a limit at some point for how many people can come in. Now, I wouldn't necessarily favour some have suggested that we send the Navy and even sink ships like the Australian government does. I'm not sure I go along with that. I think that's a bit. I understand the argument to act as a deterrent. I think the problem with that would be it would be punishing, the people who are being used by the people smugglers. That isn't getting at the people smugglers. I think a big focus has to be really finding them, prosecuting them, jailing them. The Home Secretary is right. It's an evil practice. Apparently, they took £5,000 for these people who came over in the latest causing this tragedy that just occurred. Um, it's a truly evil business, and I think prosecuting them is part of it. Of course, that's easier said than done because sometimes they're not even in Europe. In one, I believe it was Sky News, they traced down one of the people traffickers to Baghdad. So how do you prosecute them if they're actually in another jurisdiction? So it's not easy. But I think it's kind of a combination of those things. I do think we need a deterrent, but I wouldn't necessarily go the full sort of hardline approach of like sink the boats or I just think that would be misguided. Also, it would lead to fatalities. And that's, the English Channel is going to end up a watery grave, much like the Mediterranean was in 2015, 2016. More of these tragedies are going to occur. But I can't agree with charities that the answer should be simply let everybody in with absolutely no vetting, because they would have no vetting. They tend to be extremely naive about that sort of thing. I mean, I would say to those charities that you're motivated by compassion, great. But what if you have people who have a criminal record in Albania or whatever country they may be coming from? You know, we have to have vetting. We have to have vetting. If you just have this policy where you let anybody in without checks and balances, that's clearly not good. It adds pressure to our system, and it's potentially letting criminals into the country. And for those knee-jerk people who say that's racist, no, it's not racist. It's common sense. You have checks and balances. You have a practical approach. But when sinkings do occur, then absolutely the RNLI should save people. I think if you have people in distress, it's a fundamental, whatever the politics of it, it's a fundamental thing that you save lives. If they turn out to be illegal, then yeah, maybe send them back to the home country. Um, well, if they turn out to be legal, they are legal if they're crossing by those methods. But as a fundamental point, I would support saving them. You know, some people go so far as to say we should just let them drown. That's not, that is not British values. That's not us. And I think that would be completely wrong, to just let them drown, as some people would propose. But definitely, I would be in favour of sending them back, um, at least some of them, those who, for example, are definitely economic migrants, because they also need to know that, they are breaking the law, they are coming into the country legally. There's other people who do this legitimately. So it's kind of like there's two sort of very divergent approaches here. There's the sort of left wing charity approach, which is just let everybody in and make it easier, just process everyone and recognize everyone as an asylum seeker. But that is not the case, because not everyone will have that background. Some will, but there will be people absolutely being dishonest about the background, and so that there has to be vetting. And plus, it's simple. It's a question of resources. I mean, these charities must know we're in a cost of living crisis. The UK has plenty of rough sleepers. And by the way, I've never said it's one or the other. I've never said that, we should only help our own and totally ignore refugees or asylum seekers. But I do think that we have to recognize there are limits on how much we can do. Anyway, I'll wrap this up, but it's sad what happened. Of course, it's a tragedy, and anyone who's gloating about it, I don't share that sort of hard line right wing approach of being totally desensitized to it. It's a human tragedy, whatever way you look at it. But yes, there should be deterrence, and I think that if someone is here as an economic migrant and they've broken the law, then really they should be sent back to the home country if there is no hard evidence of persecution or if it's not a war zone. But why should they stay? They've broken the law. Other people have taken the legal route. It's unfair on them. Um, and finally, I probably should have said this at the start of the video. There was two other tragedies, of course, the explosion in Jersey. It seems to have been a gas explosion. 9 people died in that one, and sadly, a fourth child has died in that lake, the frozen lake disaster in Solihull. Um, so there's a trio of tragedies leading up to Christmas there. I mean, it's sad at any time of the year, but I think something about tragedies leading up to Christmas is particularly poignant. Anyway, let me know your thoughts and what you feel should be done. If you disagree with me, please suggest alternatives. What I propose is I veer more towards the government policy, but I wouldn't go the total hardline approach that some are suggesting, not the government, but some are suggesting that we just, sink the boats. But I do think the charities are being naive they're basically suggesting we just let anybody in without vetting. Yeah, I can understand the argument of making the application process simpler. I think there's merit in that. I mean, when the Ukraine war broke out, some of the loopholes, some of the bureaucracy that genuine refugees had to go through was disgraceful. And we were the only country in Europe that was putting such bureaucracy in the face of such obviously legitimate claimants. So I think there has to be common sense in this, really. Um, okay, I'll wrap this up. Let me know your thoughts.